Hello, NDSU LA 590. Today is Wednesday, September 25th, and there is another lecture as a part of our landscape architecture lecture series. Because of that, we will not have class, and also because of that, I'd like you to watch this video in lieu of class. Attendance to this lecture is just recommended. It would benefit you. It's not required, but I am requiring you to watch and follow along with this video. When we meet again on Monday, I'd like everyone to pick up where we are leaving off. This will also be a part of your exercise 3, so it will allow you to get a jump start on that. What I'll be doing is just going over some basic good practices when we first start an ArcMap document. And I'll go over a handful of other little things, offering some commentary. I don't really have a specific intent with this, but if you follow along with these exercises, you'll generate hopefully a lot of ideas on different things that you can do as a part of using ArcMap and ArcGIS. So let's get started. The first thing I'll do is start with a blank map. Also, this is on YouTube. Use pause and play quite liberally. Back up if you need to. Also, if you look in the lower right-hand corner, usually there's a little cog that you can click on to increase the resolution. I'm recording this at a high enough resolution. You should be able to clearly hear and see everything that I am doing. Now, everything we've done so far gets put in this default Geodatabase that's a part of a standard install. While that is convenient, if you're not careful down the road, it can get really clogged up with a lot of data. So we'll be creating our own Geodatabase. Also, it's a good idea to create a file or a folder somewhere where you are going to be putting this project. And I'll create one on my desktop. I'm just going to call it 590_0925. That sounds like a pretty good name. You do not have to put it on your desktop, but put this somewhere where you'll be able to find it. What's another good practice? Save your file. Save it early. Save it often. So I'm going to put this in that same folder. There it is. And the name, let's just call it exercise. It doesn't really matter, although kind of matters. Now, for the sake of speed, I'm going to be doing some sloppy things here that I'll explain as I'm doing them. But a good practice is I always name things somewhat logically. Files tend to multiply very, very quickly when we're working with ArcGIS, as you will see. So what's another thing I need to do? I need to connect to that folder. Right now I don't have any folder connections. I just cleaned that up. So I'm going to click this little icon here, navigate to my desktop, navigate to that folder, hit OK. Now I am in this folder. I should be able to open it up. I can see that exercise file that I just happen to also have open. Well, what are some other things we should do before we start adding data to this? We should create a default Geodatabase. And here's how you do that. Right-click over that folder connection, hover over New, and select File Geodatabase. It creates it. We can name it. I'll say met.gdb. If we were to jump back to our directory, we can see that it just created a folder, as I've mentioned before. Don't really mess around with that. Just kind of let it be, even though I can look inside of it. Oh, what's this? Stuff that would really actually mess up your document if you were to do anything with it. So you don't want to do that. Jump back to ArcMap. And what's another thing we need to do that's really important? Right-click over that Geodatabase and select Make Default Geodatabase. That does not automatically mean everything will go in there, but whenever you perform a geoprocessing tool or any other tool that generates new data, that's where it will go by default. Again, keeps your default.gdb somewhat clean and just makes life easier for everyone. All right, let's add some data. Well, what kind of data should we start with? If you go to ArcGIS Online from this little icon here, I'll start with this USA states. Now, this is somewhat of a dynamic featured set. It changes from time to time, so you might not see it right there. If you do not, just search for USA states. I'll let this load. It shouldn't take too long, although it kind of is taking surprisingly long. Probably because it's searching a lot of data and that actually had the opposite effect. Now I can't quite see. There it is right there. So if you go ahead and see it, this is the one I'd like you to add. All right, well, where does this go? It's on my computer somewhere because I can see it. It's not projected in the best projection, I guess, for visual communication, but that's okay. Notice nothing is showing up in our folder, and that's okay. This data that you access from ArcGIS Online, remember it might be purely presentational where you can't edit it, and regardless of that, it might also put it in a spot where you don't really know why it's there. Notice you've got your table of contents. If you for whatever reason miss your table of contents or it's gone, it is right here. Hopefully you were seeing it from the start because it's a little late to be telling you that now. But this first view just shows you the layer structure. The second lists it by source. So if you click on that, I can see that this data was placed in users, matcham documents, etc., etc., etc. Why is that important? Well, sometimes you cannot manipulate data if it's in an odd directory. Can we easily copy this over here? Not really easily, but that's okay. For the sake of this exercise, we're just going to manipulate some new information from this data, so at the end we won't need it anyway. But let me go back to my layout view here. Notice there's this over 1:3M and under. That is a level of detail that this data has been specified to. This is a layer package, and inside this layer package there are feature sets. You can see this one is grayed out because it's not visible, but if we were to zoom in, that one will become visible and the other one becomes hidden. And the reason is because this lower one shows more detail. The rivers are a little bit more accurate. And the reason is because when you zoom out here, your computer does not need to crunch all this data that you can't even see anyway. How do you adjust that? Well, you can right click, go to properties, and it's set out right here. You know what? And I'm going to change to use curves. Let's do this. You know what? Never mind. I'm not going to do that. I was going to try to show them both at the same time, but just know this is where you can set the visibility. So do not show this when it's in beyond this scale, which is 1 to 300, or I'm sorry, 1 to 3 million. Scales, okay, little side note here, they're different than what you're used to. Where we're used to relational scales, where 1 inch equals some other unit, like 50 feet. Scales in GIS are relative to the unit. 1 unit in the real world is being represented at 3 millionth of its size. Or, I'm sorry, 1 unit on my map is 3 million times smaller than its actual unit in the real world. So it's always a 1-to-1 ratio to the same unit. Let's close this and move along. Well, what are some things we can do with this? I don't want this whole like the all states of the nation. I just want to work with the continental United States. Well, if you've got this data and you've been following along in class, there's a few ways to get that. We could select it and then save that selection as a new layer. Let's try that. Uh-oh, our selection is grayed out. What do? Do you close ArcMap and go do something else? No, you want to click on this tab, List by Selection, and for whatever reason, the default setting on this is set to not be selectable. I'll go ahead and click that. Let's do that one as well. Now that data is selectable. If you don't see this, then you're just out of luck. That just means it's presentational data stored on a server somewhere. But if you're following along with this file, it shouldn't be any problem at all. Now I can take my selection tool, grab that selection, right click, and I'm going to do a data. Well, there's two ways to do this. I can do a selection, here's the quick way, and create layer from selected features. Boom, quick and dirty. Now I've got this layer here. Now I can manipulate this, and if I go to my sources, I can see that it is in the same directory as that other stuff, which is okay. But what's nice is it's just the continental United States. It's not this other stuff. So let's turn that off. If you want that data to be in your folder, and again, there's not a right or wrong answer, just more of an awareness. Let's repeat that. Let's turn that one off. I'm going to right click and do a, oops, I'm on the layer. I need to be on the feature in that layer. Right click, data, export data. And here's where I can specify where I want this stuff to go. And it gets additionally tricky. I can not only put it in that folder, I can put it in that geodatabase that I created. Here's where the relation between those two is important. If I wanted to save this as a standalone shapefile, this is important if you wanted to take this to Google Earth, for example, you would save it in that directory and set it to be a shapefile. If you want to save it inside of a geodatabase, you have to say File and Personal Geodatabase. It just treats the data different, and then click on your geodatabase. Also, here's where I'd recommend naming things somewhat logically. I'll hit save, I'll hit OK. Do I want to add this as a layer? Yes, I do. What's the trade-off? One is quicker, this one right here. And that again is where I right click, selection, create a layer from selected features. The other one takes a little bit longer, but it's a little bit more manageable and understandable in terms of what's going on. So let's get rid of this one. Right click, remove. I've just got my states here. Let's take a look at the attribute table for what it's worth. It has state names, the state abbreviation, population, etc. Lots of good stuff. We might come and take a look at some of this. But, let's just say, for example, I just want an outline of the United States. I don't want all these states. I just want a nice outline. How do I do that? Well, we would need to dissolve all of these into one new feature set. Remember, every time you do a geoprocessing tool, you're creating new data. And these are the main tools you will probably use whenever you're creating something in ArcMap. The toolbox here is the rest of the game. And there are literally hundreds and hundreds of tools, but we won't go in there quite yet. Let's do a dissolve. I want to talk about a few options in the dissolve tool set here. So what are we going to dissolve? That states feature set we just created. Where is this going to go? It's going to go in my geodatabase. Had we not specified this, that would say default.geodatabase. And dissolve fields, I'm not going to do that one quite yet, but I do want to talk about the statistics field. If I just leave all this blank, it'll just create a nice outline with no data inside of it. And in fact, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Click OK. It'll be a quick process. There's my nice outline. Right click, attribute table, nothing really in it, pretty boring. Properties, I can see there's not a lot of stuff to learn in there. Let's turn that off. Go back to this one, or I guess it doesn't matter what's clicked because we'll do that over here. And I'm going to bring up that dissolve option once again. Input features, let's go back and do states again. Output features, state dissolves 1. Notice that it's changing the name because it knows there's also a states underscore dissolve. Once again, I'm going to ignore this, but I am going to talk about statistics field because this can be kind of useful. Each one of those attribute fields or records corresponds to a state, and there's all of this data inside of it. And there's also happens to be, let's say population 2010. Error, okay, I know what's going on here. If you get an error message, when you're working with statistics fields, here's what happens. I'm basically saying, I want to take this field, oops, I didn't mean to add object ID, let's X that one out. And it puts it down here. This error is basically saying, hey, you got more stuff you still need to do, which is what type of statistic do you want to apply to that? So that field, which again corresponds to every single state, has a number that happens to be the population. I'm going to say the statistics type is sum. So it will retain that field and it will just add up all of the attributes inside of it. So let's see here. Let's see what happens. Hit OK. It'll take a tad bit longer. It looks the same, but if you right click, open the attributes table, Now I can see the population has been summarized, and there it is. So that's right, 3 million and some odd people in the country, give or take. Let me close that one or turn it off. Go back to this one again. Right click, or I'm sorry, click on Geoprocessing, dissolve, just repeating the same steps we did before. This time I'll do, maybe I want to know what the average is, the population 10 square mile. What does all these mean anyway? Well, if you were to dig in the properties, you'd get a sense of what these mean. I'll do that in a moment, but that's the 2010 population per square mile. The 12 is an extrapolation. The census is only every 10 years, so you'll get extrapolated data down here. We'll just do the population 10 square mile. Whoops, don't check it up here. We're still dealing with statistics. So population 10 square miles. This time, I'm going to say mean. That will give me the average. Maybe for whatever reason, the data, I just kind of want to take a bunch of things and figure out what the average is. Hit OK. Hit close. Let's take a look at the attribute table. There is my summarized new field. So for what it's worth, the continental United States averages 386 people per square mile. That actually seems pretty high, but I suppose there's some pretty populated areas that would make that happen. Let's go ahead and close that and turn that one off. One last time, or maybe a couple last times. I'm going to go back to dissolve, input the states again, and this time I'll talk about fields. Well, what happens if you want to dissolve the fields? It's an extra layer of information that we can use. So maybe, for example, let's say these are ranked by year. Let's say, I don't think they are. The attribute information does not exist, but let's say I want to group these by the first 50 years of the country, the second 50 years, and the third 50 years. And I could dissolve those if that data existed. Right now, nothing would really happen because there's nothing in common here. It would just give us the same data. So let me go out of here. And I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. We're going to create a new field, and we're going to apply a little script that will give us new information. This, again, take a breather here. This is the ropes course. It's just something you can do. I want you to be aware of it right now, but don't worry about it if you really got no idea what's going on. All right, let's do this. I want to create a new field that only shows the first letter of every state. So North Dakota would be N, Nebraska would be N, North Carolina would be N. And then I can use the dissolve tool to kind of show you how that tool works. And before we go in there, we need to open our attribute table, click on this icon here, and click on Add Field. Mine is not grayed out. Remember, a few minutes ago, when I saved this data to my folder, that allows this data to be editable. For whatever reason, this data that I initially started with, if you might be trying it on here, right click, attribute table, let's add field. Oh, too bad, it's grayed out. You can't do it. Why can't you do it? Well, there's kind of lots of weird reasons, but the short answer is it's because where that information is saved. So if you ever try this and you want to add a field and it's grayed out, hey, just know that you might need to export that data to another location. All right, so back to states, open attribute table, and you know, there's a lot of junk in here. We'll clean that up in a moment, but I'm going to add a field. Again, just this is a for what it's worth exercise, no specific intent. What type of data is this going to be? Well, it's not a number, it's not a float, it's not a blob, it's not a GUI, it's not a raster. It will be text. We're just going to take the first letter of each one of these. So it'll be text, and the name will be, I'll say first L. How about? That dumps it way at the end here. Whew. All right, so this is kind of intimidating. I don't like looking at all of this data. Let's close this. How do you make it a little bit more pleasurable and not headache-inducing? You need to go into that layer's properties, that feature set's properties, and click on fields. These are all of the fields that are visible. Sometimes you get stuff that's just too rich in data and it's kind of confusing and you don't want to have to waste time looking at all of these. Here's what you can do. I can turn all fields off, And I will just turn on state name. I will turn on state abbreviation. How about, and what else? Oh, I thought there was another number in here that was interesting, but I can't find it. Then I'll go down here and just turn on my first L, that one I created. We're not deleting anything, we're just changing the visibility. Hit OK. Go back here again, open attributes table. Much more easier to kind of look at and work with. Let's make that bigger. All right, so that field that I created has values of null. I mentioned this in class. That does not equal 0. It just means it does not exist. There's no data that exists. It's not nothing. It just doesn't exist. We can edit these manually, or we can apply what's called a field calculator. A little side note here. If you want to edit these manually, you have to start an edit session, which, let's back up, right click, edit features, start editing. You always need to do this whether you are deleting things. So I could highlight this and hit delete. Goodbye, Montana. Maybe, maybe not. No, well, it's not deleting, but that's okay. Or I can edit that attribute table now that I'm in an edit session. And I could go and do this all the way down. That's all, too many fields to worry about. Just one way that you can do it. Let me stop this edit session. This is a nice thing when you enter an edit session. If you really hose it up, you can just say, no thanks, I do not want to save my edits. Another way to quickly add data is to use what's called a field calculator. Again, here's kind of the tricky part. Just be aware of it. Some of this might pique interest, some of it might not. But I'm going to right click and activate field calculator. And this little warning is saying, hey, what you're doing, it's different than starting an edit session. You can't undo it, so be careful. And you can read it, and it doesn't really say what I said, but that's really what it means. So sure, I'm okay with that. What are we gonna do? Oof, Python scripting. I bet you didn't think you'd be doing this in class. Or Vbscripting. Let's try this, and we need to set it to a string. So it's Python, it's string, and we're going to use one called, or is it a Vbscript? Yeah, it's a Vbscript. This shows you how good I am at programming. Vbscript, make sure the type is set to string, and do left. Just trust me on this. Left, state name, comma, 1. So that's saying return the leftmost letter of this string and only the first character. If I did 2, it would return WA. If I did 3, it would return WAS. And hit OK. Okay, why did I do this? Because I wanted to create a field that has something common. So like, again, there's multiple states with the same letters. There's Nebraska, New York, etc. And let's go back to the dissolve feature, dissolve Geoprocess. Picking up where we left off a while ago, I'm going to input states. This time, also notice it's only showing you the states, the attributes that are visible. There are more there, but we are just not seeing them because I'm not going to work with them right now. But I want to dissolve based off of first L because I now know that there's some common data. Again, just doing this to show you an example. A lot of your data will be dissolvable, and it's really up to you and on how much value that gives to the data you're working with. Let's hit OK. Well, that sure looks the same. Ooh, but look what happened in here. We've got some states with the common letter, so they were dissolved. If I click on any one of these, it's created what's called a multi-part feature where there's only one record that applies to each one of these entities because they have been dissolved together. Nevada, New Mexico, Nebraska, North Dakota, etc. Again, just wanted to show you what happens when you do that. All right, let's go back to this one. We just want a plain Jane outline. So we've already did this once, but let's do it one more time just because it's fun to end with something simple. And I'm going to input states, and I'm going to call this just outline. And the defaults are perfectly fine because I just want that. I just want a nice plain Jane outline. This other stuff I do not need. So you can right click and remove it, right click, remove. You can hold down shift and click multiple, right click, remove. It does not delete it. Here's a good thing, in a way. Data is really hard to delete or destroy when you're working with ArcMap. Even if this were to crash, all of this data that I have been creating is saved and I could somewhat quickly rebuild it. But speaking of crashing, it does not hurt to save early, save often. Let me close this. Bring my catalog back up. Even though I removed that data, look at it, it still conveniently exists over here. Here's why you want to name this stuff. Remember I said I was being kind of sloppy about this? Oh, what was that one? What was this one? I sure don't know. I probably should have named it, but I can drag it back, and if it's not what I want, I can remove it. If you want to rename things, it's as simple as bringing up your properties and going to General. By default, your layer name will inherit the data name. So that data is called just outline. I can name this whatever I want and hit OK. Now it still shows up in my layers, and if I'm doing any geoprocessing, it will reference that name. But if I were to go and look at the actual data, which is inside my Geodatabase, so I guess it's going to be hard to find here, the name is still just outline. Just be aware of that. Let's hit cancel, and let's give that a better name. Here's also an opportunity where you can have spaces in the name. You can make it longer. The actual data gets really picky about having spaces inside of it, and you just want to be aware of that. If I were to try to create data with 120 characters and crazy characters and spaces, it would not like it. But here I can do whatever I want because that is just an alias. Should we keep this one open? You know what? I'm going to keep that one open a little bit longer because I might do some stuff with that. All right, you can take a little bit of a breather at this point because we are now going to bring in some more data. I want to bring in urban areas. We've talked about how there is different ways to categorize data, whether it's a census block or a buffered area or a designated urban area. There's all kinds of ways to designate areas, and very conveniently, if you search urban area on ArcGIS Online, let it think for a moment. And is it still loading? I believe it is. Have a drink of water. There's one here called USA Urban Areas. What's it about? Well, it's got its description. You can click details and see some more of the metadata. You can see how it was collected. You can see comments on it, properties, etc. But we just want to add this. So let's go back and whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Click that add. Boom, there it is. And we see our levels of detail again. So just like the state boundaries, these change. And how are these defined? What determines if it's an urban area or not? Is it a political boundary? Is it a city boundary? I don't know, but I bet you could find out if you were to dig in the properties of this file. But you know what? We won't dig in there too much because, let's just say there's a few more processes I want to do. I want to identify all areas of this map that are within 100 miles of an urban area. Why would I want to do that? I don't know, but let's just pretend here. So how could I do that? How do I quickly identify all areas of the country that are within 100 miles of an urban area? Well, buffer, that would be a good one. So I could go in here and input, this urban areas, and it's going to go to my Geodatabase and give it a name. I want to buffer this 100 feet, or I'm sorry, not feet, that wouldn't make any sense at all. 100 miles and go on, etc. I'm not going to do that. If you're ambitious, go ahead and give it a try, but I guarantee you it will take a long time because these boundaries are very intricate and it has to mathematically calculate 100 miles from every point along the edge of each one of these boundaries, and it would give you kind of a little odd blob shape. but just know that it can be done. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to hit cancel. I'm going to be a little bit more generic. I just want to find all areas that are 100 feet from the center of these points here. So another little side note, when you're calculating things like this, I could say, show me 100 miles from the center of this city. But what does center really mean? Is it the mathematical center, as that you can crank out from a formula, or is it the cultural center? In Fargo, the cultural center is probably Broadway, maybe right in front of the Fargo Theater, right? The mathematical center is probably in the middle of some ugly, industrial zone. So just keep that in mind when you're creating these. I'll just do the mathematical center. How do I get to that? Well, we will jump into a tool. Where is that? I don't know. That's why I'm going to search for it. Click the search tool and let's just type center. I know center is in the name. Or feature to point. Hey, there you go. So I was totally off in what I was looking for, but as long as you vaguely kind of know what you want to do, you can just search for it here. Point. Feature to point is the one I want. Maybe I want make a point. You can get creative, but if you do happen to know what the actual name is, you can just search for it. To point. Oh, I want feature to point. Go ahead and click on that. That will show you where this tool lives. Go ahead and click on that tool. If it does not work, here's what you got to do. Go to Customize and Extensions and make sure that you've got the correct extension turned on. Which one is this? Oh, I'm not quite sure. Just turn them all on. This is under Data Management Tools. So feature to point. Input features will be my urban areas. I'll do that top level one will work good. And output class, let's go ahead and hit OK and give it that horrible name that will probably haunt me later. But it has created this centroid in the center, the mathematical center of each one of these urban areas. Let me go back one more time. Let me bring that tool up again, because let me talk about this. Input features, I could do that again. What does inside mean? Well, if you've got a city or an urban area that's maybe shaped like the letter C, maybe it circles around a boundary of water, that will force the center, it'll force this point to be inside of the shape and not mathematically in the center. Because you might have a situation where this tool will generate a point that is actually outside of your data. That will prevent that there. All right, so now I've got myself a bunch of points and I need to kind of clear up some space here. Now I can do a buffer that will run much smoother. So Geoprocessing Buffer, I'll input that point that that feature set I just created, and I'm going to call this one 100 M buff. How about for 100? And for miles, I'm going to click here and type 100. And I believe the rest I can leave as defaults. Uh-oh, something didn't like it. Let's see what happens here. That's okay. I kind of like running into errors. Maybe it was the name. Maybe it was a linear unit. I don't know. So here's what I'll do. I'm going to save it outside of a Geodatabase. Sometimes you run into issues. There's all kinds of ways to solve it. One way I like to do is save it outside of a Geodatabase. So let's go to my folder and I will save this here. Give it the same name. Let's hope it works. Otherwise, I got to come up with an idea really quick. All right, hey, that worked. Excellent. So that shows me all of the areas that are within 100 miles of an urban center in the contiguous continental United States, lower 48. But it's still a little bit messy because it's overlapping a lot. I just kind of want one piece of information. I don't want all of this. How do we fix that? Well, we would use the dissolve tool again. We're going to dissolve those shapes together. So I'll select 100 M buff. The defaults. I recommend giving these names for sake of time. I'm just gonna skip over it. And there we go. Now I can turn off some of these other ones. Oops. Let's close that. You guys are going to hate me for this, but I think I forgot to mention, if you do geoprocessing options, disable this background processing. I might need to make an amendment to this video to have that early on, but make sure you disable that. That will force you to have to see the processing, and it will prevent your computer from crashing and also prevent you from trying to run the same thing multiple times. So again, that's under geoprocessing options. There you go. All right, so now we've got this. Well, notice that it kind of goes off out into the ocean. We don't want that, so we need to do a clip. I'm going to clip that data that I just created, and I'm going to clip it with state outline. And, oh, let's see here. Output feature class sounds good. Let's see what happens. Oh, I think I was not paying attention. I clipped my points, which I do not want to do. So let's remove that. Geoprocessing clip. All right, let me back up. Here's a situation where naming these will help you not run into errors like that. So if you got a lot of data over here and we're still kind of in mid-process, maybe you want to name these things to help you out. So I'm going to right click on that shape and I'm going to say clip me, and I'm going to right click over state outline and I'm going to say clip with me. All right, that doesn't make sense in terms of visual communication, but until I get to a presentation data, this will work fine. Geoprocessing, clip me, and clip with me. There we go. Close this, turn that off. All right, now I've kind of got a neat little map that shows me all the areas that are within 100 miles of an urban area. So Fargo is kind of its own little island, obviously very populated. Wasteland up here. Okay, if you're doing an analysis, maybe you want to know where you're going to go when the zombie apocalypse arrives. Yeah, right around this area. Looks promising right now, doesn't it? So, all right, for the most part, this is the end. There's one little add-on that I'll show you, and that's taking this data to Google Earth, making it presentational. This is not very exciting. You could print this map out, but it's kind of bleh, doesn't really show you a whole lot. It's also this weird projection where the circles look squished. So first thing I'll do is I'll change the projection method. If you right click on your data frame, which it says layers, oops, don't click on the name though, right click, properties, and here is your coordinate system, which determines the projection. I'm going to search for AUX. AUX will give you in the neighborhood of the Web Mercator auxiliary sphere. Hit OK. Yeah, that's a little bit better, I guess. You can kind of experiment with the different projection methods. But here is the one thing that I want to do. I want to take this clipped area and take it into Google Earth. How do you do that? Well, you can import shapefiles to Google Earth, so that's kind of cool. You cannot import Geodatabase material. So I would need to export this data, right click, export data, and I'm going to, let's go back, let's cancel. Notice the default, it wants to put it in that Geodatabase, which it's good if you're just kind of staying inside of this little ArcMap ecosystem. But whenever you want to start taking things into other programs, you need to do a couple things. One is specify where the directory is. Also, don't forget to change the file type. If I tried to save this as a geodatabase and I'm not in a geodatabase, oh, what's going to happen? It yells at you. So I need to say shapefile, and let's call this something 100M. I've already got 100M buff, so I'll say 100M buff zone.shp. Hit save, hit OK. Do you want to add this for this situation? Not necessary. Let's take a look at that. Look at all these other files it created along with that. I stress this a lot, broken record, but it's important. I always keep things together in one folder, so if you were to move to other computers, all I really need to do is take this folder. Oh, let's open up Google Earth Pro, because this is something you cannot do with Google Earth Normal. And I'm going to close this tip, and we don't need that. Let's do this. File, import. What do we want to import? We want to import a shape file. So make sure you specify that. And just go ahead and navigate to your shapefile, which was this one. Hit open. Do you want to apply a style template? Right now, let's say no. If you've got a lot of rich attribute data, you can have some fun with this, but I'm going to say no. And it puts it in my temporary places, hidden for whatever reason. Let's turn it on. Yeah, it looks like that. Why did I not want to apply a style template? Because oftentimes it's just easier if it's really basic just to edit it here. So I'll right click on that data, properties, click on style and color, and uncheck random. And I'll set my lines to 0, and I'll set my color to be something like, oh, how about that, at 50%. Mac version looks a little bit different, but hopefully you can kind of make the correct connections. Let's try 40%. All right, that looks good. Okay, so now this is starting to get a little bit more interesting and engaging, and you can start seeing actual urban areas where it's a little bit more informative and exciting than just looking at this, I guess. And with that, I will end. I know it was long. We did a lot of stuff. If you can get this far by Monday morning, you'll be ready to rock and roll for the next things that we will be doing. As always, if you have any questions, please email me, and good luck.